well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment.
Today, we don't have a guest, so Leigh and I will be discussing aspects of training with a firearm. That will include several aspects, some of which are dry fire.
Yeah, for sure.
Laser type systems out there to train with. But I think ultimately most important is actual live fire. A lot of those training systems that I'm personally a big fan of.
Yeah, I know you are.
They can enhance the training. They can make the training more efficient, but there is not a replacement for live fire training with an instructor.
Yeah, it's like the law of specificity in exercise. You could augment your football playing skills by developing specific kinds of strength, like in a gym. But, you know, when it comes right down to it, playing football is, you know, playing lots of football and making that football playing as close to a real game as possible is really where the rubber meets the road. That's where you get your most benefit.
Without a doubt. And I know plenty of people, especially over the past few years, with some of the chaos that ensued through the country with some of the riots and protesting. I know plenty of people that went and bought a firearm. I believe we actually discussed it on a previous podcast briefly, but they bought a firearm for protection of themselves, their house, their family, and they purchased the firearm that day, or that they were actually able to receive it after their waiting period, got some ammunition, went into the range that day, fired it, and it has pretty much sat in a drawer since initially firing it. And I am obviously a proponent of people having firearms and carrying them, but I'm actually a very big proponent of training with the firearm, because
You definitely are. You in my opinion, and it's one of the reasons I respect you, is that you definitely put your money where your mouth is. And when I say money, I mean like your time and your effort. You do take the time and effort to. You have tried to train yourself to a higher standard than just go fire a few rounds and put the gun in the drawer.
I have, and I appreciate that. Do you remember why?
I do, but
Okay.
the listeners don't. So
Okay, then I'll tell the story.
tell the
quickly.
story.
After I got my concealed carry license, and I started carrying a firearm pretty religiously right off the bat, and I did a little bit of shooting, and I've always done a bit of what I call shooting, target shooting. Some of it was as simple as setting up some pop cans, setting up some clay targets on a 4x4, and shooting. I wouldn't have considered that training, because to me those are two different exercises. But I was in a scenario where I was at outside of a property that my brother was actually thinking about purchasing, and it had abutted up to a wooded area. And as we were standing there talking, a individual came out of the wooded area, and this was, I'm going to say it was about 8 o'clock at night. It was definitely dark out. It was drizzling, so it wasn't the type of conditions where you generally get a lot of people walking around, especially coming out of a forest. So I immediately noticed this individual and noticed he had a rather large knife on his belt. And as he's walking down the sidewalk, I was hyper-focused on him. And when he got to the driveway of the house that we were standing on the porch of, he turned up the driveway. So I acknowledged him. I said, "Hey, how you doing?" He goes, "Hey." And he proceeded to walk up to us. And as he got to where the sidewalk between the porch and the driveway meet, he started to come up the sidewalk. And I said, Can you stop right there for me? I made a motion to raise my shirt, because this individual I didn't know that has this that point, I'm considering a weapon on him, is approaching us and really barely acknowledged the fact that I was speaking to him. And I thought that it was a type of scenario that could escalate quickly at this point, because now he's in what I would consider, or most people would consider, getting close to the red zone, that 21-foot separation.
So let me just clarify. So when you felt like he had disregarded your attempt to communicate a boundary, you felt like he kind of just blew right past that gate, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that in general, especially in a situation where there isn't a crowd, there's either two people, one-on-one, and you start to acknowledge the other person, or there's a group and you acknowledge, there's typically some sort of pause to just kind of acknowledge, hey, no big deal, guys, and there wasn't that pause. There was
a time for sort of feeling one another out.
Without a doubt. And there wasn't that.
Yeah.
So this individual kept walking up. So then when I made the motion to raise my shirt, to get my hand on my firearm, he stopped. And at that moment, he actually identified himself as a DNR police officer.
Yeah.
And he was in the forest looking for an illegal hunter. Apparently, in that area, consistently, there was somebody that was breaking some of the laws in regards to hunting deer. So he was approaching us to ask us what we had seen after he came out of the forest and he saw us. So from there, it obviously de-escalated very quickly, but I definitely had an adrenaline dump. And I, without a doubt, for weeks, 2 to 3 times a day, ran that scenario through my head. Because what it came down to is I almost drew a firearm on a police officer. Mm-hmm. And at up until that point, I had not done a lot of training. You and I had gone through a couple things with my concealed carry class. But you had also mentioned that you do individual training. Mm-hmm. And after a few weeks of running that scenario through my head, I had reached out to you because the realization was, had I squeezed the trigger to fire on somebody, whether it was a police officer or not, just an individual, we were in the middle of a neighborhood. And as soon as I were to squeeze that trigger, I own that bullet. Yeah. No matter where it lands. A car, a house, a tree, an individual, the ground. And it was very eye-opening to me, because I know that I was always able to, quote-unquote, shoot. But what I also realized is, if I'm going to shoot, I want to be as accurate as possible. I want to make sure that that bullet is going to end up where I intend for that bullet to end up. Yeah. And actually, you brought a little bit of peace to my mind, because I was questioning everything I did wrong.
You sure did, yeah. I remember that part for sure.
And you told me, you said, Joe, you recognized that there was a possible threat. When you realized that he may have been coming toward you, you acknowledged him. You indicated for him to stop. And you really put me at ease, because what then, through our conversation, made me realize is, in this instance, he was wrong. When that individual, that officer, stepped onto the private property from the sidewalk and was going to approach us, I feel very strongly, and this is my opinion, that he should have identified himself before stepping on that private property, as opposed to waiting, coming up the driveway, just about to the sidewalk where he's getting close to us. I feel he should have identified himself much earlier.
Yeah.
So from that point on, and that was right now, that was just a little over 5 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, I I dove in deep. Started going to the range 3 to 4 days a week to work to focus on fundamentals. Had a lot of one-on-one training with you, and we in the beginning we focused a lot on dry fire, on a holster draw, things of that nature. And I feel 5 years after that incident, I am a much better shooter. But not just that, the training that we've gone through that has enhanced my abilities. Every aspect about carrying a firearm with me, I feel I'm better now than I was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've had the pleasure of seeing you grow. I kind of not regretted. I kind of got nervous before this podcast because I started to realize that some of it was going to be about me, and I sort of was like, I don't really want to talk about me.
Sure.
And I'm proud of my successes in life, but I've certainly had more than my share of failures, and I kind of I'm the type of person I don't always take myself too seriously.
But that's how we learn.
I've sort of had this, philosophy that I got from my grandfather. Any club that would have me as a member, I don't want to be a part of. So I know that as a self-defense instructor, I have the trust of people, and I try to make it clear to them that there's I don't have any answers when it comes to a defensive situation. I could maybe help impart some things that might help you manage a violent encounter, so that you get you get more optimal results. But I can't give you any specific answers like, A plus B equals C, and every time we put these two together, you'll get this same beneficial outcome. It just doesn't exist. So yeah, but it's really not about me. I've gotten to see you. I get to see you grow. And you already had some, in my opinion, that day. Maybe we could sort of talk about and Coach Tony Blauer. He'll probably never listen to this, but anybody who's out there who wants to, one of my life-changing experiences was finding Coach Blauer. If there's one of the things that I've been successful at is I've sought out the best of the best to relay some of that to my students, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
So Tony Blauer and his timeline of violence. And so what I realized really quickly when you told me that story back 5 years ago was that you handled at most of the levels leading up to a potential violent event. That would be the X. You handled that timeline pretty well. The first thing I would say is your situational awareness was good. You were with your brother. There were a lot of reasons why you could have been task fixated, whether it was looking at the house or having a conversation with your brother, whatever it is. There were plenty of excuses for you not to be paying attention that at that moment. But you had the presence enough to realize there was somebody rooting around, coming out of the woods. Now, maybe in retrospect, you say, well, it was really easy. He was making a lot of noise, and it was like super obvious. Like there's,
right.
Even an idiot would have noticed that this guy was coming out of the woods. But like what I see for a lot of just people in general is that they tend not to be very aware of their surroundings. They tend to be task fixated a lot of the times, and they're not. They're either looking at their phone, deep in conversation, and they do those things a lot of times in places that are not so advantageous to be doing them.
Well, realistically, that's the being aware of your surroundings, of your situation, of the people around you. That is one of the best ways to avoid a situation. If you're walking into a gas station or a convenience store and things don't look right, everybody in there is standing perfectly still and they're all focused on the same area. When you look at their face and you see their eyes, it's very possible they're focused on somebody that's threatening them. And situational awareness may mean you turn around and go back to your car and just wait a little while and just see if you were being paranoid or if something happened, something was going down. And that situational awareness is an important part of training, even though it doesn't even involve a firearm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really where in my background, sort of doing diplomatic security in high risk areas of the world, we spent a lot of time trying to anticipate where danger might happen. So we were doing most of our work ahead of time, trying to avoid those places and people and things that could pose a threat.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, like you need to do your homework. You need to understand where and how violence happens, especially those places, and then to be switched on, to be a little bit more aware, to bump up your situational awareness in those places, can be crucial to you. That's the best outcome, right? You see something, it doesn't seem right, and you choose to go to a different gas station.
Sure.
And if that, you'll never know the result of that, right? Unless there's an armed robbery and you find out about it later and you're like, hey, I almost walked into that place and there was an armed robbery. But yeah, you most times you won't have that luxury of finding out. You'll just have moved on to somewhere else, and you'll never know. But that's where safety and security happens, and that's the best. That's always the best outcome.
I agree with that. And what I would add on top of that is that I encourage people to look at their surroundings, look people in the eyes, pay attention to the way people are acting, the way people are moving. If somebody has their hands in their pocket, sometimes you can even tell, like a jacket pocket, a front pocket, a hoodie, something like that. A lot of times you can even tell if they're holding on to something. There's nothing wrong with observing the people that are around you. It makes some people uncomfortable. They think you're staring, but there isn't anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
You had told a story, I believe you were up in Michigan, and you were observing a lady walking into a store.
Oh, it's one of my favorites, yeah.
And you said, you if I recall correctly, you had said you think she had either a law enforcement or military type background because she observed you looking at her at one point, and she more than one time looked back to focus on you.
Yeah.
So she was.
Yeah, lots of layers here.
You were paying attention to what was going on for whatever reason.
I was actually playing a game that I maybe you remember. I'm sure I've mentioned it to you. The X's and O's.
X's and O's, absolutely.
And there's a firearms instructor out there, or a self-defense instructor. Or I'm not sure if it's coach, but someone in my progress of becoming who I am today, I came across this. So this is not Lee Castle. There's someone out there that thought of this, and it's a great game, and I play it to keep myself on my toes, and I recommend it to other students. So I'll just go over it quickly here. When I go out sometimes, and especially like, if my wife is driving and I don't have other responsibilities, I'll play the X's and O's game. And so we're out in public, and if I see I try to notice people before they notice me. So I'm just looking at people. I try to look at them through any barriers that they might have. So if I'm coming up to a store, I'm looking through the glass doors of the store into the people in the store. And I'm always trying to catch them not noticing me and noticing them first. And if I do that, I give myself an O. Right? That's good. That's the good score, right? If I look at someone and they had already been looking at me, noticed me, then I give myself an X. And I just feel like sort of like I dropped the ball a little bit. I should have been able to detect that person looking at me. No one gets attacked without someone looking at them. They have to be looking at them.
Sure.
So just noticing that can be, pretty beneficial. So here I am in a parking lot. My dad is driving his pickup truck. I'm sitting in the sort of the jump seat of the pickup truck. My sister's in the front seat, and I'm back there bored. And I'm like, I'm going to play the X's and O's game. And so we pull up in a Menards parking lot. My dad backs into his space. And to our front left, there was a woman getting out of her car. And she noticed me right around the same time I noticed her. And I was sitting. So I noticed her in her vehicle, but she noticed me in the back of my dad's vehicle. So she had to look through the windshield, which most people don't do, and into the depth of the car to notice me that I was looking at her.
So she's obviously paying attention to her.
Exactly. So I'm like, me being a personal protection coach, I'm like, I go, good job.
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, but
Good for you.
She doesn't know that, right?
Right.
She's like, weirdo. This is weirdo staring at me, right? 9 times out of 10, a person that caught my gaze like that would look away. And she didn't. She got out of her vehicle. She walked to the front of the vehicle, and she's still looking through the pickup truck. And I sort of said to myself, well, let's see how long she'll play this game. Because at some point, she's going to break and pretend that I don't exist. Because that's what I see over and over and over. Which to a certain extent, to some extent, could be a sort of victim language.
Sure.
Right? I'm uncomfortable by your gaze. And because I'm uncomfortable by my gaze, I'll avert my gaze. And I hope that this isn't what it could be. So she doesn't. So in order for her to get in Menards, she has to cross in front of our vehicle, our car. And so there she is, and she walks in front, and she just turns her head as she walks, turns her head to the right, and she just looks right inside the truck.
I love it.
Right? Yeah, it was a beautiful thing, right? And at this point, I'm feeling a little guilty, but not too bad, because I'm like, am I
Right.
sort of,
A creep.
given the, taking it too far, but I didn't. She was doing a great job. I actually, on the inside, I was like, man, this is fantastic. I wish more people. But
Right.
then I had this thought, and I said to myself, well, there's no way she gets to a point where she can no longer look at me without literally stopping and turning. And she's approaching the entrance doors to Menards. And I'm like, she gets an A++ if she stops and turns to see if I follow her in the store.
She makes a real effort to find out where
She sure did, man. She got right to where the automatic doors open up, and she turned around over her shoulder and looked and saw me still inside the pickup truck.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she did great. And
Yeah.
and that's the thing. Like I encourage people to have the confidence and don't worry about what other people are thinking. Pay attention. Look them in the eye. See what they're doing. There's no harm in double checking to see what somebody's doing.
In certain environments, that could be risky. So, like if you change the scenario and that's a woman, and she notices another woman looking at her through the window of a vehicle, and she's in a neighborhood with high gang activity, that could be very bad. Well, if she was just a normal girl and she looked at a gang member in the back of a vehicle and held the gaze, right?
I gotcha.
That could earn you a beatdown, right? So in some situations that could get you attacked, but in a parking lot in Northwest Michigan,
Sure.
Not known for any gang activity at all. Her holding the gaze is probably I'm some type of predator, right? Either am looking for a resources, I'm going to try to rob her, or I'm a process predator and I want to do something maybe even worse.
Well, I guess with that additional clarification, I should encourage people not to hang out in gang areas.
Right. Well, that's the obviously all of our I hope I would assume that most people's goals are to that, but reality is reality, and sometimes, and also, you know, things are shifting. You could be in a Walmart parking lot here,
Absolutely.
and run into a gang group who's in a vehicle who might not take too kindly to you holding a gaze at them.
Absolutely.
So you know, those things we just have to be. So you know, so we've sort of talked about. I think we went through 2 layers, and this could be pretty educational for the listeners, I hope.
Absolutely.
Or enlightening or interesting. You know, we have that avoidance piece. We need to know where violence happens and how it happens. We're getting a little bit closer now, and we're talking about recognizing signal compared to noise. So what you did in your story is a good example of recognizing signal for noise. So noise would be sort of the staticky background, right? There's all kinds of things happening all around you all the time.
Right.
Noises, visual stimulus, all kinds of things happening all the time, and we prioritize the things that are most important. And so we're always looking for signal. What we have to develop as good defenders or good protectors is a good ability to determine what's just noise and things I can disregard, or things that are a priority. And in that case, you picked up on what I thought was a good priority, right? You knew it was a more isolated area, right? Because you said you were sort of on the edge.
Yep. At the end of a street.
Where there was woods,
Yep.
right? You then perceived that there was a person coming out, but then you started to detect noise, right? And this is the stuff. If it's Jeff Cooper's color code system of awareness, at that point you're going to sort of like condition orange, and you have good reasons for it. So this is signal now, right? You have a person who's coming out of the woods on a day where most people wouldn't be hanging out in the woods, right? And that person is moving toward you. Do you remember off the top of your head, is he looking at you guys at this point? Like, as he's sort of coming out of the woods, is he already?
Not immediately.
Not immediately.
So I would say between the woods and the driveway he turned up was going to be 70 feet, give or take.
Yeah.
And it was about 15 feet to 20 feet out of the woods that he put eyes on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it wasn't a fast-paced walk. So to walk those 50 feet, several seconds, whatever it takes. But in hindsight, plenty of time to take a badge out from under a coat,
For sure.
where it was. And over now the years that I've played that back, I feel that should have been done within those 50 feet.
Did he ever produce a badge?
He did when at that moment when I said, hey, stop, I put my left hand up to, gesture for him to stop while my right hand was going to raise the shirt that was concealing my firearm.
Yeah.
And he identified himself as a police officer and then took the badge out. And looking back, that could have been very bad for me. It could have been very bad for him as well.
Yeah. So you got lots of signal is what I'm trying to say, right? You got a guy in a place where it seems odd, right? And
Absolutely.
you notice it. But then the next thing is that they're moving on a vector that will intercept you at some point. They're coming toward you. And then the other thing that you notice is that there's a weapon.
Right.
Right? So, guy out of place, weapon, person moving toward you, isolated area, all those things for me are check marks in boxes.
Right.
And so, the good thing that you as a, relative neophyte, you're like, you picked up on them all, right? And so when we had our first conversation, I was like, let me turn this around for you a little bit, Joe. If I had been coaching someone, like those are all the things that I would have liked them to do, and you did them all.
Which really helped me mentally.
Yeah. And then you gave a verbal challenge, right? You established a boundary at which you wanted to see if they would cross or not cross, and that tells you a lot about the intent of the person that you're dealing with.
Right.
Right, so all those things, right? So you gave them a little. I think Craig Douglas from ShivWorks calls them gates, right? And you gave this guy a gate at which he could choose to. Once you tell him, "Hey, could you hold up right there? Like that's far enough." That's a gate that could tell you a lot about intent,
Sure,
right? And help you determine signal from noise. Is this just a person who's lost and needs some directions, and is just going to stop right there and go, "Oh yeah, sorry, man, I was just wondering such and such," right? Or are they just going to disregard that and come closer?
Right. Right. So in an instance where somebody may find themselves with somebody that's willing to go past that last gate that I put up, that was like, hey, stop. Let's find out why this scenario now exists. Somebody that's willing to not stop, that's when the situational awareness, I don't want to say goes out the door, but we're past that level. Mm-hmm. And now we're at a point where somebody may find themselves needing to discharge a firearm. Because up until this point, mind you, I noticed the knife. What I didn't notice was the firearm on his right side, because as he's approaching us, his left side was to us. And obviously in this instance, it ended up not being a situation where anybody had to draw their weapon, but it was right in that cusp, and people find themselves up against somebody going through that gate, and that's where the training, the practice, the shooting, the muscle memory, hopefully they've done enough where they can now defend themselves, their family, and dispatch any sort of violence that's prepared to walk upon them. So what is our best way as individuals to be ready for that?
Yeah. Well, you're in that scenario. You've got this guy coming up the drive. Deadly force. There's that sort of tripod, right? There's means, opportunity, intent. Does he have the means to cause you great bodily harm? Yeah.
Yeah.
You saw it. There's a knife.
Right.
Does he have the opportunity? In other words, is he at a place and distance where he could, if he wanted to, cause you great bodily harm? Yes.
Yep.
So the only one that you have left that there's some doubt about is, did he have the intent?
Right.
Right. And by you establishing your boundary, right, saying, hey, hold up right there, you're giving that yourself and that person an opportunity to either show you that they mean you harm mm-hmm. or not. And you found out, right? He didn't mean you harm.
Right.
Right. And so, I can't think of, could you have, the only way I would have say it better is maybe you would have stopped him
a few feet earlier.
Yeah,
a couple seconds
right?
earlier. Sure.
But, that's pretty textbook, Joe, right? And I think we had that conversation, right? Now
we did.
I think the reason we wound up to the training was in your mind is like, what if it hadn't been?
Absolutely.
Right. What if it had been
whether
a real deadly force threat?
Whether it's
and
you,
how would I have handled that?
Anyone else out there, you decide to squeeze that trigger and send a round. You are responsible for where that bullet ends up. And like I said, we were in the middle of a neighborhood, and I'm fairly confident I'm more confident now that I would have landed on target. But anything can happen. You can, no matter how much training and how much practice you've had, anything can happen. And that's why being conscious of where that bullet may end up through a lot of training serves a person very well. So you and I have practiced, trained all sorts of different scenarios. I go to the range pretty regularly. However, at most indoor ranges, you're very limited on what you can do. It's great to practice fundamentals. It's great to practice accuracy, If you make any modifications to your firearm, go out there, test reliability, continue to make sure your firearm, your equipment is functioning properly. With that being said, most indoor ranges don't allow you to draw from holster either. So that's a whole additional component to a self-defense scenario of your equipment and training with it, which is why we've gone.
Having it on you.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that, at the outset of this, you talked about you're new and that you started carrying from the get-go, and that's rare.
Yeah.
So you had the gun when you need it. It's sort of one of my bottom lines. My students that come and take my courses, I'm like, hey, like, you have a gun when you need it.
Yeah.
And the best gun is the one that you actually have. If it's too big, it's too bulky, too inconvenient. A 32 in your pocket that night is better than the 9mm that you left in the center console of the truck.
Sure, absolutely. Me personally, I'm a fan of carrying even full size.
Yeah.
And
You're the real deal, Joe.
in the 5.5 years or so that I've had my concealed carry license, other than a little bit of traveling, I can count on one hand how many times I have not carried a firearm.
That's awesome.
And thinking back, I'm not even sure why I didn't. But it's so few. I mean, it's probably less than one time a year.
Yeah.
But with that,
Do you agree with the adage? It's not comfortable, but it's comforting. How do you feel about that phrase with relation to carrying a gun?
it is comforting. I would agree with that. When people say it's not comfortable, maybe for them. There's some instances where it's not real comfortable. And with me being a bigger guy, usually comes down to the type of chair I'm sitting in.
Okay.
Do I need to worry about whether I'm going to sit down or upon getting up out of a seat, does my firearm, is it going to catch on an armrest or anything along those lines?
I see.
In terms of walking around and the actual comfort level of having it on me, it's never bothered me. I would say the first week and a half, for me, the only part about it that was a little odd was now I'm different. Where I previously wasn't carrying a firearm and now I am. And I felt like everybody that saw me was like, oh, now this guy's carrying a gun. Which makes no sense because it was concealed the entire time. But in my mind, now I'm different.
Yeah.
But it's not uncomfortable for me at all. And I think part of that is finding the right equipment. And everybody carries a little differently.
Yeah.
You know, I'm cautious to say this because I don't know for certain, but I think I'm right. They say the fastest way to draw a firearm from concealment is the appendix position.
I think so. Yeah.
That's not comfortable for me. Again, being a bigger guy, it would not be comfortable. So I'm not going to choose to try and carry in a manner that's going to then make it uncomfortable, because then maybe I choose not to. So I think there's enough equipment, and there's certainly enough of an option. There's many options now for concealed carry. I think when one of the reviews I wrote up on our website was the SIG P365.
Yep.
And when they came out with that, to me, that changed the industry for concealed carry firearms.
Yeah.
Because it used to be either low capacity on a smaller firearm, or larger firearm, larger capacity. Yeah. And with the P365, when SIG decided to put, I believe the first one was 10 rounds in the magazine, and then design the firearm around carrying a 10-round magazine, they changed that segment of the industry. And if somebody walks into a store now and they're looking to get a firearm that is easily concealed, there's an abundance of options, which I think is great. But then along with that is the holster designs. There's inside the waistband, outside the waistband, single clip, dual clip, adjustable cant, adjustable height. Do you prefer Kydex? Do you prefer leather? Do you want a separate magazine pouch? Do you want that built in your holster? It's almost endless. To be able to find the equipment to be able to comfortably carry a firearm, I think is relatively easy.
Any recommendations?
Oh boy. Let me put it this way. I've had plenty of people ask me that, and I think the first thing I usually ask is, do you plan on carrying every day? If the answer is yes, great. Obviously, I'm a proponent of that. Are you comfortable to carry with a round in the chamber? Because some people aren't. And I'm not going to say that's good or bad. My preference is to carry with a round in the chamber because you can save time. But some people aren't confident enough in that with that position. So if somebody is not comfortable with carrying around in the chamber, then I definitely recommend not getting a firearm that has a thumb safety, because that's a lot to do in a high stress situation, to rack a slide and disengage a safety in a high pressure situation. If somebody does want to carry around in the chamber, is the only way they're going to do that with a thumb safety. So it's kind of a series of questions to zero in on what those options are. I guess my general answer is get whatever firearm you are going to comfortably carry on a regular basis and you enjoy shooting. Because if you're going to, I'm a big proponent that if you're going to carry a firearm, then you need to train regularly, train often. There's, for a newer shooter, or say maybe an older shooter, you gotta go get a 1911. Well, if shooting a 45 ACP is going to not be very comfortable, and that means that you are then going to not practice shooting, go with a 9mm 1911, or what, a double stack 1911, 20, whatever it's being referred to now. But I'm also a big fan of capacity. So I prefer an individual being able to carry the largest firearm they can, that they're comfortable with, that they're willing to shoot regularly, that will hold as many rounds as possible.
Yeah, one of the people that really impresses me and I think has contributed a lot to the personal protection field is John Correa from Active Self-Protection. And the beauty about what John Correa has done with his platform of videos is that he's taken so much of that security video and dash cam and badge cam data that's out there, and he's sort of coalesced it. I don't know of anybody that's done it as much of him or as well as he's done it, and his the idea that you'll do a reload, we just don't see it. I'm reminded of Coach Blauer on the physical sort of unarmed defense side of things, talking about martial arts that have a prescribed move for different kinds of attacks, right? And Coach Blauer sort of always said, and if I misquote him, I'm sorry, but he sort of says, all those things are well and good. Sort of the wax on, wax off move that you learned at your martial arts dojo except when we look at CCTV footage, we never see it. Like literally never see it. And it's the same thing John Correa says with a reload. Like, it's all well and good for you to have an extra mag and to know how to do that speed reload, right? But we don't see it.
Sure. And part of that could be,
So you probably fight with what's in your gun.
ep-
Like that'll be what you have to fight with, and that will usually end the fight.
and the FBI has a statistically, it's something like 96% of shootings, it's a rule of three, right? 3 rounds within 3 seconds. 3 rounds within 3 seconds within a distance of 3 yards. And obviously, there's all sorts of outliers. But having the capacity, in my mind, there's no downside. Unfortunately, now in Illinois, along with a few other states, that's limited.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Illinois is 15 rounds now in a pistol. And 15 rounds may sound like plenty. And according to the, FBI, it is. But there's plenty of instances where 3 rounds isn't enough. And there's multiple attackers or assailants. And who's to say an individual is trained enough to get 3 rounds on target?
Yeah. Yeah, I think from if I didn't know I was going to be in harm's way, I would certainly consider 15 plenty. But if I knew that the threat level was high, I'd want way more.
Ruger 57 holds 20 rounds.
Right.
Just an FYI for anyone that
Yeah.
wasn't aware of that.
Go.
I did a review on that firearm, and that's something that's very attractive with me personally with that firearm is 20 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. There's you're pretty well covered.
Absolutely.
So
Joe.
let me ask you this, because you are a personal trainer of self-defense, where do you recommend a beginner start? And I know, let me preface it with, I know your overall ideology is you are much more likely to be in a physical altercation.
Yeah, one that doesn't meet the threshold of
Sure.
great bodily harm.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's. Have you been in a physical fight ever?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many do you think?
When all in, including when I was younger?
Yeah.
6.
Yeah.
Or
So,
7.
half dozen,
Yeah.
10, 20, depending on what kind of
None were
character,
my
how much
fault.
drinking you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, the point is like, those are the things that happen, and they happen the most.
Right.
So being able to handle being able to manage violence at those lower levels that don't rise to that great bodily harm, I think that's where people should spend most of their time.
Sure.
And within that, we want to spend most of our time avoiding places where that happens. A good one is don't hang out where people get high or do drugs or drink, especially drink. Right, because there's that strong correlation between violence and alcohol.
Sure.
Right. So stay away from places like that. Watch the people that you hang around with. Don't go. What does John Correa say? Don't go do stupid things, stupid times with stupid people.
Yeah.
So if you're not hanging out with those kinds of characters, you can, So you want to practice good avoidance, but then you want to have that good sense, that good sonar or radar or whatever you want to call it to determine signal from noise. What are real potential threats? What do they look like? How soon can I detect them? And if I can detect them really soon, I could probably evade them.
Absolutely.
Right. If I see the dude rumbling around in the forest and I see that he's got the knife from a distance, maybe I just go inside the house, and then I never have the confrontation on the driveway.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
And those are the things. That's the area where I sort of where the dignitary protection experiences that I had really taught me to think that way more. That's where success That's where you get your success, because those things are more guaranteed.
Sure.
Right? Those are guaranteed victories where I don't open myself up to any further risk. The closer I get toward that potential violent event, the X, the closer I get to that, the more risk I expose myself to. And then I lose a little bit of that control and that assuredness that things will turn out well for me. So I would say, you asked, what a beginner, if I had my way, learn a ton about violence and how it happens, both the low-level violence, the stuff you'll encounter more often, and the high-level violence, the great bodily harm stuff that maybe your gun is the best response if you're right on that, near that X. I would start just educationally learning about the realities of violence.
Sure.
So if you understand violence, then it's like anything else. If you understand it well, study it, right? Then you get it, and it's I'm very fond of saying it's a big animal, right? I always talk about this story about the blind mice and the elephant, and the mice are in the front, and there's a trunk, and they think it's like a garden hose, and another blind mouse is by its ears, and he thinks it's a big fan, And so there's these mice, and they're sort of feeling around this elephant. So the blind mice are feeling around this elephant, and they're touching different parts of it, and it seems like a different animal. And only when you put all the clues together do you figure out that it's an elephant. It's the same thing with violence. Different kinds of violence are very, very different. Armed robbers act differently from rapists, act differently from someone who wants to teach you a lesson. Rory Miller, if anybody gets a chance to read any of the books out by a guy, Rory Miller, read his stuff. His observations on violence are another one of the profound changes I've had with respect to personal protection.
Interesting.
So that's where I would start. I'd say, get as much information as you possibly can, and then you tailor your responses based upon the realities of the violence that you're likely to face. If you go out and you run out and buy a gun, you have purchased a potential solution to a very narrow sliver of all the types of violence that you could encounter, and you bought the tool that might be the most significant thing you'd need if you wound up in that situation. But you're leaving a lot of you're missing a lot of the elephant. You're touching the elephant's tail, but there's a lot of other stuff out there that you need to know about.
Yeah, the gun's at 100,
But
and a lot happens at 50.
We don't do it that way. That's my wish for people, but that doesn't sell.
Sure.
Right? You know what I'm saying? That's not reality. That's what I wish people would do. But what happens is people either go and buy a gun and then they realize they don't feel confident, or they just let it sit in a drawer and they don't really care about it. And it's a strategy. It's one way. If the down and dirty happened and someone invaded your household and all you had was the chance that you might get to that drawer with that gun that's been sitting in there for 2 years, that's better than none.
Absolutely.
Right? But obviously that's not
ideal.
optimal. Yeah.
But we also live the real world where time is a hot commodity.
Yeah.
So if somebody is going to train, are they better off training for the worst case scenario or training for something that's more likely?
Yeah. It depends. It depends on what motivates you. If the worst case scenario is what motivates you and your training, and maybe it bleeds over into some other things, that might not be that bad. So if you start your firearms journey because you're worried about a terrorist event or a mass shooting, right? Mm-hmm. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than being in a mass shooting. But let's say that's what motivated you. But then on that journey, you realize how to avoid, detect, diffuse, and then defend yourself with your gun. But you learn those other things too, the avoidance and the detection and all that stuff. That's not so bad.
Gotcha. So with somebody that is a new gun owner that comes to you and says, Leigh, I want to get better. With my firearm, I want to improve. Very similar to
You're going to buy a
biopolishing.
Mantis X.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple podcasts ago, we had a Jake from Mantis X.
Yeah.
And he told us about a lot of their cool stuff, some of which I had already used. But since then, Leigh has dove into using the Mantis X10 Elite. I believe that's
Yes,
that's
I think so.
one.
Yeah.
And what are your impressions of it now? First,
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And it might be the peculiar place I find myself in, having been sort of in this realm for several decades in different capacities. Now, I just sort of found myself kind of in a slump. I've always had dry fire as part of my repertoire.
Sure.
I believe in it strongly. I was taught by people who had good reason to believe in it, and that's worked out well for me. What I mean by that is when I use my firearm at a range, I tend to be pretty competent, and it reinforces that what I'm doing in dry fire is working. Right? It's not perfect, like you said. Obviously, there's a live fire component that cannot be replaced yet.
Right.
We're getting real close in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Which is pretty exciting and pretty cool.
I would agree with
We can
that.
talk about those too. But yeah, Mantis. I was slumping. I was just kind of like, man, it's a chore. When I was dry firing, I was only doing the things that I sort of like doing, and even that was sort of like a chore to me.
Let's face it, it can get boring.
Yeah.
It can be a little boring.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what's happened to me. So for me, like I said, it was a chore. It was like something I felt like I had to do because I want to maintain a certain level of competency, right? When I shoot a drill for students, I want to be among the best. I don't have to always be the best,
Right.
But I want to be, I want to
Be in the top few.
I want to be up there, right? So, and I certainly wouldn't want to embarrass myself. I don't think as a trainer, it's really not about me. What I really want to do is I want to see my students accomplish things and for them to grow. So I always look for that. Like, don't judge my class by like what I'm able to do. What are you able to do when you're done taking my class? What do you understand when you're done taking my class? That's what makes a good instruction or not.
Well, you probably don't recall this. When I took your concealed carry class, when we had to qualify, the distance is 5, 7, and 10.
Yep.
And I, believe it or not, was a little nervous. And a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't realize if they're not very familiar with shooting firearms is 10 yards, although not far, isn't close either. It's, you can miss. People miss targets at 10 yards regularly.
Yeah, it's that gray area for new shooters where things start to get difficult.
Sure. So when I took my first 10 shots at 5 yards, I shot pretty well, and you noticed a flaw in my grip. I don't know if you remember that. And you're like,
I don't.
Joe, do me a favor. When we go back up to 7, try this for me. And it was shifting my right hand over. It was a little bit too far to the right, so that I didn't have enough of my right thumb on the left side of the firearm. So my following 10 shots at 7 yards were as good or better than my 10 shots at 5 yards, and gave me a little bit more advice going back to 10. And my 10 shots at 10 yards were as good or better than my previous 20 shots at a further distance. And that was just from you making a couple recommendations with what it turns out is a huge component is the grip.
Yeah.
When gripping the firearm, it is I think the most crucial part of where that bullet ends up. Obviously, aiming is crucial, but you can aim all you want, and if you're not gripping that firearm, when you go to squeeze that trigger, it's gonna go awry.
Yeah, I think I lean more toward that. I lean more toward teaching grip and the consistency of it. I lean more toward that than I do sort of like the front sight focus kind of thing. They have their place. They're both really, really important. But you asked me sort of like new shooter. Mm-hmm. I think that's what you want to focus on is like making sure that you have a good coach or have gotten good information that gets you into a grip that is most optimal, again, for who you are. There can be differences in how people are built or what have you. But getting your grip squared away and consistent and the most optimal you can get it, or optimizing it the most, is the way to go. That's what I would recommend to a new shooter.
Gotcha. So at Castle Defensive,
Yes.
Castle Defensive.
Yep.
What are the different options, or what are the classes that you offer?
Primarily, people are looking for concealed carry. And in my concealed carry classes, you're getting basic firearms. So sort of there are some people that they just bought a gun or they're thinking about buying a gun and they sort of want just a basic understanding of firearms and a little bit of experience shooting them. And if you take sort of concealed carry 1, I cover most of that in concealed carry 1. Like you'll get basic firearms training. And so I sort of just recommend to people like either one. I'm like, just get your concealed carry, like do the 16 hours. You'll get lots of experience, whether you decide to carry or whether you don't decide to carry. It covers lots and lots of bases. And if you do decide to carry, get your concealed carry card, then you're good to go from there. So that's sort of like my bread and butter, and that's the most attended. The other side of things that makes money for me is I started this business not in firearms. I started it in physical self-defense. And I did that for a bunch of different reasons. When I came back to Illinois from my service in the United States Army, and then later doing some contracting for the Department of State, I came back here and I started teaching at public school, and I realized that we were doing such a great job raising kind, caring, compassionate young people in the United States. And I was struck with this, these two feelings. We had these wonderful educators with like super good hearts and that were doing all these wonderful things for young people, like way more than I had at similar ages in public schools. I'm like, wow, these people are great. And then I start meeting the kids, and I'm like, the kids are great. And I think when I started teaching, I had been home literally from a combat zone for 3 months, and I like walked into the classroom.
Interesting.
So those were my first experiences. Like, I had this great sense of pride. I was like, this is why I made the sacrifices. None of my personal sacrifices, were that great, but there are some. Certainly, other people sacrificed way more than I did, and some gave the ultimate sacrifice. But I had this profound feeling that this is worthwhile. Like, this is why we do what we do in the United States. Excuse me. So then, shortly after that, I was like, oh my gosh, we're setting ourselves up for victimization.
Sure.
Like, we don't give young people much to go on when it comes to resiliency and facing people and dealing with people who are willing to use violence as a tool to get the things that they want.
Are you saying our society's become soft?
It seemed to me that maybe we had leaned too far on the side, and I think this gets down to people's philosophies of human existence. And I don't think we're ever going to, we're never going to exterminate evil from the human experience.
Agreed.
And evil coming from other human beings, like doing evil things.
I agree with that.
So I was like, oh my gosh, like we don't have anything for them. And then sort of when they do, because there is such a thing as good and evil, and there are good kids. There's a saying that goes something like this: it's incumbent upon every parent to prepare their kids for some of the perils that they'll face in life. And I sort of said to myself, we're not doing a good job at that.
I agree with you.
Knowing that they're going to encounter it. And so we send kids out in the world, and I think of, your kid who was the captain of the soccer team, and he gets into college. He was, the center on the soccer team and did all these great things. And he goes out with some of his soccer buddies and some of his just friends who maybe aren't in athletics. And they're out at a bar, and, somebody's in that bar who's just full of hate and rage because they haven't had all those successes in life. And
yeah, whatever their reason.
They're in a dark place, yeah.
Yeah, they're bitter.
And that person is prepared to, take a bottle and carve up your captain of the soccer team's face in it. And what we've done a great job is teaching that kid to appreciate fairness, to negotiate,
to be the better person,
to be the better person, to stand up for their friends, who might not be as capable. And we don't give that kid anything to be prepared for that moment, right? They have athletic ability, but they don't know that the person who's trash talking in front of them has a buddy who's gonna stick a bottle in their neck.
Yeah.
Without them seeing it. And so very real early, I knew that there was sort of like this gap. The other thing is that we really weren't giving any resilience to kids, right? Like there wasn't anything difficult that they were doing that required them to sort of face fears or
times have been
resiliency. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
In general, times have been very good. In whether you're talking about economically, which is a huge part of it, at least in the radius and the circle that I exist in, there haven't been the hardships that there's been in past generations. And when there aren't hardships, a lot of times there isn't that resiliency because there hasn't been the necessity. Life has been good. Life has been easy. And people become very complacent physically and mentally.
So I started teaching at middle school. We had in our school district, we had an elective period during the day at the middle school level where students could take something that a teacher taught, that the teacher had either specific interest in or specific skills in. And sort of given my background, I decided to do a personal protection course, but that was just sort of like the things we talked about that are most important to know: avoidance, detection, diffusing, everything except literally what you would need if you were on the X and had to defend yourself physically. Because at the time, I didn't have the stars weren't aligned where I could actually do that in the school setting.
Gotcha.
For a bunch of different reasons. So I taught basically like it was the education of violence, right? Like just understanding it. And my students that took the class as an elective loved it. And so after a couple years, the classes were always full. I think the very first one that I taught, kids stood up and applauded at the end of like the 8-week course.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I
And I was like, I got embarrassed, Joe.
really.
Well, you know,
You're a
I'm
pretty
very
humble
like,
person.
right.
Yeah.
I don't, I think that's the reality of what it is, because here's what happened to me. I felt myself getting flushed in the face, and I felt embarrassed. And so there was a kid who I trusted who was a little rough around the edges. He was kind of like not a school kid,
Sure.
you know, not a goody two shoes kind of kid. And he was standing and applauding. And so I asked him, and I was like, "Are you guys kidding me or what?" Like, because I thought they were putting me on.
Let's mess with Leigh.
Yeah. And and he looked at me and he like shook his head no. And he said, "Mr. Castle, like this is the best course I've ever taken at school." And I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Because it's things I can actually use in my life."
Makes a lot of sense. It's great.
And so I was like, "Wow." So it was a course that a lot of students enjoyed. And clearly, I think from the feedback, students got a lot out of. I wanted to take it to the next level because I do believe that you could do all those things right. You could do a lot of things right, and still wind up having to defend yourself physically. And so I wanted to give them the gift of being able to do that. And I always wanted it to be where they face some adversity as well, to build that resilience component that was missing.
Yeah. Not everyone gets a trophy.
I had been on a search probably since I was 10 years old for some type of, martial art, some kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi, wax on, wax off, something that works. Wound up when I was doing diplomatic security, and just prior to that, sort of dabbling in like Krav Maga, which is the Israeli martial art that's taught to their IDF soldiers. And there was always something that wasn't quite jiving with my experiences of the different kind of violences that I had experienced in my life. And there are some that I never had, whether it be armed combat against an enemy that is not your peer, right? Or whether it was armed robberies, muggings, or just sort of what people might call a street fight or dominant scuffles, what have you. Those were sort of my experiences in life. And I was like, something's not quite right here. And I could never put my finger on it. And luckily we live in this beautiful information society, and I was able to do like research, and I find Tony Blauer. Tony Blauer teaches a spear system. And it, to me, it's the closest thing to a holy grail of personal protection, unarmed personal protection. He does things with law enforcement and military that take it more into the armed camp. But for sure, the man, when it comes to that stuff, has done genius work.
Yeah.
With all that stuff. So please, out there, whoever listens to this, go to Tony Blauer. Look up Tony Blauer on YouTube.
There's a lot of videos.
There's tons of stuff,
Yep.
yeah, and it's always very very interesting and enlightening and entertaining.
Well,
it's adult content, so it's not like
sure.
it's not your you don't want your 10-year-old necessarily listen to Coach Blauer swears a lot.
But with
I love
that,
Coach Blauer, but
But with that,
it's true.
You've taught a lot of kids.
So that's what I started doing. Yeah,
two of my kids have taken your class, and they both came away from that liking it very much, partially because they got to beat each other up a little bit. And
they were way too eager for that, Joe.
They definitely were, but it's very much reality based.
Well, yeah, that was a big thing. What I wanted was that resilience part at the end, and running scenarios with that kid, that their graduation was unlike any other graduation, right? You need to face a bad guy. Because ideally, like whether we're talking about firearms, you mentioned live fire, right? Mm-hmm. And live fire is good too, but to a certain extent, there's it's so much bullcrap, because it's still you're shooting at a stationary target that's not shooting back.
100%.
If we really wanted to get it right, like that target be moving and shooting back at you.
Right.
Right. And even better yet, like the scenario, whatever happened that precipitated the shooting, we would hope that that was realistic too. Like whatever happened before, what coach always says, what happened before, what happened before, what happened before, what happened before.
Yeah.
Like the things that, what are all the
Led up to
series
it.
of consequences, series of events that led up to that. And that's what we would want to practice. And so I incorporated that into Coach Blauer makes these things called high gear suits. They're basically, you look like Iron Man, like a black clad Iron Man.
Right.
And you put these suits on, and I'm able to have students go at it, and I'm able to do it in realistic environments instead of in a dojo like that looks like a dance floor with mats on the floor. I could have kids do a scenario in a hallway, where lockers, a bathroom, outside of a vehicle. And so that's what I did. And it was pretty successful. So I think the way the two rabbit holes we got on, you asked me about what courses I teach. Concealed carry on the firearm side tends to be my most popular. Although I offer what's come up recently is a lot of people are interested in training quarterly. So they've taken a course, maybe it's concealed carry. And they go, man, that's not enough for me. Like, I just don't feel like that's really makes me competent, sort of like how you felt. And so what I have several clients doing is they're coming and training with me every 3 to 4 months. And it's like, boom, and we document it. I give them a little certificate that says, here's what we worked on that training session. And so a lot of people have done that. So, I've got the quarterly trainings. And I have my self-defense, personal protection. I call it iBodyguard. My iBodyguard is for kids, for young people. I start out around 7th grade, so right around 12 years old, and we go up right to seniors in high school.
And on the firearm side, you'll actually instruct one-on-one, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some of my clients have just said, hey, I'd like to train with you privately, and I do that. So I'm pretty boutique. I run my business out of my home. It gives me lots of flexibility. I am a teacher, and so I have periods of time where I'm not teaching summers.
Right.
And so I'm able to devote and do things maybe that other instructors might not have that luxury of doing. And I've always, my big thing is always too, is like I've wanted this, I really felt, most of my time doing dignitary protection was not protecting, what you would call like a VIP. So think, VIP would be a senator.
Right.
Right. Most of the time, these are lower level bureaucrats that are just doing business, in at that time in Iraq. And so that was sort of like the bread and butter. That's who we're protecting mostly. But sometimes we were protecting VIPs, right? Hillary Clinton.
I don't like her.
Yeah. Well, there's the interesting thing, right? Yeah.
But that was the job.
Yeah, and I did my job as good for Hillary Clinton as I would for anyone else, because we're Americans.
Right.
And that's what Americans do. We need to keep that in mind, everybody, right? So, but my feeling was like, why is it that we just reserve this information and training only for our VIPs? I wanted to make that available to our youth and to average people. And so what I really try to do is I try to keep my prices low. I try to be very, very reasonable when it comes to training. But at the same time, I hope that people realize that the training they get is like literally world class.
I would agree with
And that's
that.
what
I would
that's
endorse
what
that.
I pride myself on. That's what I hope to accomplish. I don't know if I do. I really hope that I do. But I think everything that I see, sort of reinforces. I don't see any. I'm always keeping my finger on the pulse of the training environment. And while things have changed for sure, I don't see anything where I get blindsided and I go, why haven't I been doing this? It's actually been the reverse. that the things I have implemented or been attempting to implement are the things that are slowly coming online.
You see
Except for Mantis X. These guys beat the crap out of me. This was a brilliant idea. But sorry, I don't want to jump right off that subject. Is there something you wanted to say or ask me about sort of the training philosophy or component?
No, I think you hit all the points there, and I would just add that the way I was able to take your class and the way we met was due to your flexibility, if you remember, because I had a lot of scheduling conflicts.
That's right.
And
Still do, Joe.
yeah, tell me about it. But then also, what I was able to tell, just through our first couple of phone conversations before we even knew each other, was that you wanted me to get my CCL. You didn't it was, you didn't even know me, but you're like, here's someone, him and his wife, they want to, take a class, and their lifestyle is a hurdle to get that accomplished, but I want them to get their concealed carry license, and you made it happen because it was important to you. And that was definitely something I picked up on, appreciated. Obviously, ended up taking that class. But then through some of your one-on-one instructions and tutelage, I became better. And then, I've taken, oh boy, I'd really have to sit back and think, but between some pistol courses and carbine courses, besides you and I training together, 5, maybe 6, something along those lines. And what I like about the courses you put on is for a group, they're applicable, they're enjoyable, but it's all very low pressure also. And I think that's important for people to understand, because I think there's a lot of people, even after getting a firearm, may feel intimidated.
Yeah.
They may feel, well, if I go out there and I'm not shooting as well as, the guy 3 spots down from me, they'll be embarrassed, or that they're going to get mocked or anything like that. And I think what a lot of people should realize is that true firearm enthusiasts are very encouraging, very, very supportive, because the notion is the more people that are trained better, the better off we are as a whole. So your teaching, and then the groups I've been involved with that you've pulled me into, it's all been great. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it, and I really look forward to doing more of it.
Well, thank you, Joe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate that.
And I think in the future we might be incorporating some Mantis X,
Yeah.
or Mantis products.
I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. I immediately think I have students. I know I have students I've trained right now that would like to take their skills to a higher level, and I would like to offer these, in class, to purchase, because right now I can't recommend it enough. Like I said, I got to this point where I was kind of slumping, and I went when I finally gave this to me, what, 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, something like that.
And it took me a couple weeks to even find the time to hook it up. And I did dry fire a time or two, but like I said, I've really been slumping. When I'm doing really well, I'm probably dry firing almost every day. And I got this. I got to the point where I'm not doing it hardly at all. And I hooked this stuff up, and I was immediately hooked.
Yeah.
Is it perfect? No, but there's so few flaws. I don't see why not. And if you have a coach, I don't know that I would necessarily, and it wouldn't be bad, right? It wouldn't be optimal if you went to the gun store and bought your gun and bought Mantis alongside of it and then went and just trained on your own, although
Right.
You'd still be pretty good. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not so bad at all, right? So it's like a coach in a box, right? But if you had a coach and they were skilled in the Mantis and they could sort of help you, to avoid some of the pitfalls that might come with training, dry fire training on a mantis. And you could say that about dry firing too. But it's great. And the thing is how motivating it is. Like,
Absolutely.
you can compare yourself to yourself, which I think is the best because it gives you instant data, and the data is recorded for you. I didn't know this until yesterday. I can make notes on my training sessions with
Yeah.
it. And the notes are maintained on the app on my phone. So if I shoot a particular drill,
Yeah.
so I was shooting it, I think they called it the peg leg offhand drill yesterday. That's what they have, daily drills. And I look forward to doing the daily drills, right? And the daily drill was pretty chaotic yesterday. It was stand on one leg and shoot left-handed.
Something that you probably would not
No,
have.
and I wouldn't, I
decided.
wouldn't say like that wouldn't be, hey, you're a beginner. Let's
Right.
work on standing on one leg and shooting offhand. Although there's some research that show the more chaotic your training is, the better it applies to the real world, and I think there's some truth to that. But at the bottom line, you do have to, at like any beginner, you have to spend some time working on fundamentals that
Without a doubt.
are going to be the backbone of what you have to do. And you could do that with Mantis. And as long as you have a coach to sort of guide you and make sure that you aren't building in Coach Blauer is always fond of saying, be careful what you practice because you might get good at the wrong thing.
Sure. So something that we've talked about, a common saying is practice makes perfect, right? And,
Perfect practice.
Right. And that's the caveat. Practice makes perfect if you're practicing properly. It's very easy to fall into bad habits. And if you don't know you're falling into those bad habits, you may find out at the wrong time.
Right. But man, Joe, what a powerful combination. A motivated student with the financial resources to purchase the gun and Mantis, and then have a coach that you train with quarterly. And in the meantime, you're working with drills that sort of between you and your coach are saying, yeah, here's the ones I want you to work on Mantis. And here are the things I don't want you to do because it could be a something we don't want in your software. Man, powerful.
Absolutely.
Powerful.
And with that being said, what I'd like to let everyone know is that if you go on the homepage of 2atoday.us, which is our website, at the bottom of the homepage, you can find a link to Castle Defensive. So anybody can reach out to Leigh for any of the topics that we discussed, whether it's spear training for an adult, for teens, or whatever age bracket Leigh has classes set up for, concealed carry classes, individual training. You can reach Leigh through that link. I believe right next to Leigh's contact is the Mantis.
I think you're right.
We're an affiliate for Mantis. And if you're interested in picking up any of their products, please visit our homepage, go through there. They support us, and that helps us support the Second Amendment. But those two links right there, using them for some firearm training, it wouldn't take very long for somebody to become pretty proficient. I can attest to that because I've used Leigh as a trainer, and I've used Mantis to practice with. And if somebody has questions regarding some of the Mantis products, scroll down on our podcast because we had that conversation with Jake, and he went through a lot of really great features on several of their products. There is a review on our website of the X10 that I wrote. Leigh's going to be adding one, and we're both going to do the Laser Academy and just keep going from there. But they're great training tools.
For sure. Yeah, they really well thought out. Very effective. Yeah, I can't say enough. And that's not, whatever. It's not because we're affiliates, right? Like we're not benefiting in any way that I know of from our relationship with Mantis. I think if they click on it, does an end user get a discount or anything? Are we there yet, or anything with that? Like if somebody clicked on Mantis through us, is there anything?
I don't think we have a coupon code set up with them,
all right.
but we have the affiliates on there.
But this Mantis system is the one that you bought.
Oh, yeah.
before we
Yeah.
were podcasting.
No, that wasn't.
Before, yep.
No, absolutely.
Like we're not, I don't benefit anything from this.
Well,
Like this is just a kick-ass tool.
Ironically, I had their first system, and one thing that
That's right. Yeah.
I looked very
Go ahead,
highly
pump that
on.
up because that is a good.
I looked
great feature.
very highly on that I wrote in my review is that when they came out with the X10 Elite, it then supported more options and had more metrics that I wanted to incorporate. So I was like, okay, well, I want to get this X10 Elite. Unfortunately, I have this one. I was kind of going back and forth mentally, like, well, do I shelf this? Do I try and sell it? Then I learned Mantis has a great trade-in program. So they gave me, I'm going to say it, but I'm not certain. I believe they gave me almost half my money back, trading in the original, just so I can upgrade. And I looked so highly on that because what it shows me is kind of what I mentioned with you about taking concealed carry class with you, is that here's another organization that wants people to improve. It's not just about selling a product. It's, yes, selling a product, but what it is really about is getting the device in more people's hands. Yep. And I look very, very highly on that. So any of the affiliates that we do sign up or that we're currently signed up with has nothing to do with any sort of compensation or a donation.
Yeah, that's not how we're profiting.
It's all strictly because probably already been bought by one of us, and we liked it and we believed in it. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense for us to try and support them as well.
For sure.
Did you want to mention any additional training that you offer in terms of firearm specific?
I can do other things because of my background, long range shooting. I don't know that there's that big of a demand for it. And then always the resources, having a venue where you could, shoot 1,000 yards or.
And we will probably do a podcast on long range.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, let's look forward to that. We also wanted to mention upcoming.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Thanks for reminding me. Both Leigh and I are really, really excited about a podcast that we are going to be having in the next couple weeks, and that is with an attorney by the name of Dave McDermott. And for those of you who don't know who Dave is, he's a really well-known attorney that deals with Second Amendment issues, whether it's from a criminal defense standpoint or...
Yeah, is he primarily a criminal defense attorney? He's not really like constitutional law, is he? Or
I believe it's criminal defense.
Yeah, I think so too.
But has a really, really profound knowledge and basis of the Second Amendment, the Constitution, and a pretty incredible record of wins versus losses in that regard. He's a huge proponent of the Second Amendment, and had a conversation with him about a week ago. He's a little busy for the next 2 weeks or so, but we're gonna have a podcast with him, and I'm very I'm very much looking forward to that. So if any of you have any...
And practices in Illinois, right?
Yeah, he has a practice. I believe it's Olympia Fields, a far south suburb of Chicago. But if there are any specific questions that any of you had regarding the Second Amendment, appealing some sort of FOID or CCL decline, some of the new laws that have recently become active in Illinois, feel free to email us at the email address is info@2atoday.us. You can go to the website, email us direct there. We have a Facebook page now. It's pretty easy to track us down and get a hold of us. But if there are any questions that any of our listeners have, I'd love to get those over to him and have him answer it. And hopefully we can all learn a little bit from Dave.
Absolutely. It's going to be a good one.
It is going to be a good one. I'm very much looking forward to that one. Okay.
Come train. Weather's going to be getting nicer. If you're interested, reach out to me and let's get some educational training done.
Is the best way to get a hold of you through the link on the website?
Yeah, you
through
can
email.
you can. I think the best thing is to call me. 815-274-1959 is my company phone number. Call me or text me at that number. Tell me you're interested in training, and we'll get you taken care of.
And you typically don't have a problem finding out what somebody's looking to do specifically and kind of forming a class around that. Is that correct? Or do you have set parameters?
Yeah, no, I've found that the best way to do this is people's schedules are so complicated. For a million reasons. And so I talk to the client and I kind of find out what their situation is and what they're looking to do, and we work it out from there.
And what they're looking to get out of that class?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then I'll either plug them in something that I have that's existing, and if I don't, we'll just make something happen for them at a time and a place that's convenient for them.
Oh, that's good. That's real good. Okay. And with that being said, we will catch you next time.
Thank you, Joe.